The morning sun cast long shadows across the rolling hills of Montana as Jake Morrison guided his horse through the familiar terrain. The weathered rancher had been tracking his missing cattle for 3 days, following hoofprints that led him deeper into the abandoned sections of what used to be the Henderson property. The old homestead had been empty for nearly a decade, ever since the bank foreclosed and the family scattered to the winds. Jake pulled his horse to a stop as something caught his eye near the dilapidated barn. At first he thought it was just debris caught in the wind, but as he squinted against the morning light, he realized it was movement. Deliberate, human movement. Someone was there, crouched behind a stack of rotting hay bales, watching him with the intensity of a cornered animal. "Hello there," Jake called out, his voice carrying across the quiet morning air. The figure immediately ducked lower, disappearing completely from view. Jake dismounted slowly, his boots crunching on the dried grass as he approached. "I'm not here to cause trouble, just looking for some missing cattle." The silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant call of a meadowlark and the soft snorting of his horse. Jake had dealt with enough frightened animals in his 43 years to recognize fear when he saw it. This wasn't just caution, this was terror. "My name's Jake Morrison," he continued, stopping a respectful distance from the barn. "I own the ranch about 5 miles east of here. Some of my cattle wandered off during the storm last week, and their tracks led me this way." He paused, studying. The shadows where the figure had disappeared. "I'm going to check the barn for my animals, but I want you to know I'm coming." As Jake approached the barn doors, he noticed signs that someone had been living here. A small pile of empty cans sat beside a makeshift shelter constructed from old tarps and wooden planks. The arrangement was clever, hidden from view unless you knew exactly where to. Look, whoever was here had been surviving on their own for some time. The barn door creaked as Jake pushed it open, revealing the musty interior filled with abandoned farm equipment and scattered hay. In the far corner, partially hidden behind an old tractor, he spotted movement again. This time, he caught a glimpse of long, tangled hair and clothes that had seen better days. "I can see you're scared," Jake said softly, his voice taking on the same gentle tone he used with spooked horses. "But I'm not going to hurt you. Are you hurt? Do you need help?" The figure pressed further back against the wall, and Jake could hear rapid, shallow breathing echoing in the empty space. Jake's heart clenched as he realized what he was looking at. This wasn't some vagrant or trespasser. This was someone who had been living rough for far longer than anyone should. The careful way she moved, the terrified alertness in her posture, everything about her screamed of someone who had learned to survive by staying invisible. "How long have you been out here?" Jake asked, though he didn't expect an answer. The girl, for he could now see it was a young woman, probably in her early 20s, remained frozen in place. Her dark eyes tracked his, every movement, calculating distances to potential escape routes. Jake slowly reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a protein bar, one of several he always carried during long rides. He placed it on a hay bale halfway between them and stepped back. "I'm going to look for my cattle now," he said, "but I'll be back this way. If you're still here when I come through again, maybe we can talk." He turned and walked away, fighting every instinct that told him to stay and help immediately. Years of working with traumatized animals had taught him that forcing the issue only made things worse. Trust had to be earned, especially from someone who clearly had every reason not to trust. As Jake mounted his horse and rode toward the back pastures, he couldn't shake the image of those frightened eyes. Tomorrow, he decided, he would return, and he would bring more than just protein bars. Don't miss what happens when Jake returns to the abandoned homestead. Will the mysterious girl still be there? Subscribe and hit the notification bell to find out how this unexpected encounter changes both their lives forever. Jake returned the next morning with a thermos of hot coffee, sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, and a heavy heart. He had spent the previous evening researching missing persons reports, but found nothing that matched the girl he'd encountered. It was as if she had simply vanished from the world, forgotten by everyone except herself. The barn stood silent in the early morning light, and for a moment Jake feared she had moved on. But as he approached the makeshift shelter, he noticed the protein bar was gone, and there were fresh footprints in the dirt around the water pump behind the barn. She was still here. "Morning!" Jake called out as he tied his horse to a fence post. "I brought coffee, real coffee, not that instant stuff." He held up the thermos and set it down on the same hay bale where he'd left the protein bar. "And sandwiches. My sister Sarah makes the best roast beef sandwiches in 3 counties. This time the girl didn't immediately retreat. Jake caught a clearer glimpse of her as she peered around the edge of the barn door. Her face was gaunt, with high cheekbones that spoke of both natural beauty and prolonged malnutrition. Her clothes hung loose on her small frame, and her hair fell in matted waves past her shoulders. "You don't have to come out," Jake said, settling himself on an overturned milk crate about 10 feet away. "But I thought you might like something hot to drink. Gets cold out here at night, even in summer." He poured coffee into the thermos cap and took a sip, demonstrating that it wasn't drugged or poisoned. Minutes passed in silence. Jake found himself studying the clever ways she had adapted to life in the abandoned homestead. She had rigged a rainwater collection system using old gutters and buckets. A small garden patch behind the barn showed evidence of careful tending, with wild berries and edible plants that most people wouldn't recognize. "You're pretty resourceful," Jake said quietly. "Takes real skill to survive out here on your own." He paused, watching as she emerged slightly from her hiding spot. "How long has it been since you talked to another person?" The question hung in the air like morning mist. Jake wasn't sure if she would answer, or if she even could, but after a long moment he heard a voice so quiet he almost missed it. "Don't remember." The words hit Jake like a physical blow. He carefully kept his expression neutral, not wanting to scare her back into silence. "Must get lonely," he said simply. She didn't respond, but she moved closer to the barn entrance, drawn perhaps by the smell of the coffee or the promise of human connection she'd denied herself for so long. Jake could see her more clearly now. The way she held herself suggested someone much older than her actual years, someone who had learned painful lessons about trusting others. "My name's Jake," he said again, hoping repetition might help her remember that not everyone was a threat. "What should I call you?" Another long silence stretched between them. Jake began to think she wouldn't answer when she spoke again, barely above a whisper. "Emma." "Emma," Jake repeated, and he saw something flicker across her face at the sound of her own name spoken aloud. "That's a good name. It was my grandmother's name." He gestured toward the thermos. "The coffee's still hot if you want some, Emma." She took a tentative step forward, then another. Her movements were careful, calculated, ready to bolt at the first sign of danger, but hunger and the basic human need for warmth won out over fear. She crept forward until she could grab the thermos, then immediately retreated several steps. Jake watched as she cradled the warm container against her chest, her eyes closing briefly as she savored the heat. When she finally took a sip, a soft sound of satisfaction escaped her lips, the first purely positive emotion he'd seen from her. "When's the last time you had a hot meal?" Jake asked, gently. Emma's eyes snapped open, the brief moment of peace replaced by wariness. She clutched the thermos tighter but didn't answer. "There's a sandwich there too," Jake said, nodding toward the wax paper package. "No strings attached. I just hate to see anyone go hungry." As Emma reached for the sandwich with trembling hands, Jake noticed the scars. Thin white lines crisscrossed her wrists and forearms, telling a story he wasn't sure he was ready to hear. But one thing was clear. This girl had survived something terrible, and she'd been surviving it alone. Stay tuned for Chapter 3, where Jake learns more about Emma's past and makes a decision that will change everything. Hit that like button if you're invested in Emma's story, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible tales of human resilience. Over the following weeks, Jake established a routine. Every morning before tending to his own ranch, he would ride to the Henderson property with supplies, coffee, sandwiches, sometimes a thermos of his sister Sarah's homemade soup. Emma began to expect him, emerging from the barn more quickly each day, though she never strayed far from her hiding places. It was during the third week that Jake finally heard Emma's story, pieced together in fragments during their careful conversations. She'd been working at a truck stop diner 3 states away when a man offered her a ride home after her car broke down. Instead of taking her home, he had driven her to a compound where she and other girls were held against their will, forced to work in conditions that Jake couldn't bear to think about for too long. "Escaped during a police raid," Emma told him one morning, her voice still barely above a whisper. But when they asked questions, nobody believed my story, said I was making it up, that I was just another runaway looking for attention. Her hands shook as she lifted the coffee cup to her lips. Foster family didn't want me back, said I was damaged goods. The words hit Jake like a physical blow. He had to turn away for a moment to compose himself, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. When he turned back, Emma was watching him with those same calculating eyes, waiting for his reaction to confirm what she expected, that he would see her as broken, used, worthless. "Those people were wrong," Jake said firmly. "Every single one of them was wrong. You're not damaged, Emma. You're a survivor. There's a difference." Emma stared at him for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether he was telling the truth or just saying what he thought she wanted to hear. "You don't know what they did," she said finally. "You're right, I don't," Jake replied. "And you don't have to tell me unless you want to. But I know who you are right now, sitting here in front of me. I see someone strong enough to escape a terrible situation, smart enough to survive on her own for months, and brave enough to start trusting again. That's who I see when I look at you." Tears began to stream down Emma's face, the first tears Jake had witnessed in all their meetings. She quickly wiped them away, but not before Jake saw the glimpse of hope struggling to surface beneath layers of pain and fear. "I don't know how to be around people anymore," Emma admitted. "I don't know how to live in the world." "You don't have to figure it all out today," Jake said gently, "but you don't have to figure it out alone either." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "My sister Sarah runs a women's shelter in town. No questions asked, no pressure. Just a safe place to sleep and hot meals. She's helped a lot of women who've been through tough times. Emma's body tensed immediately. I can't. I can't be around people. They'll know just by looking at me. They'll know you've been hurt, Jake said. But that's not the same thing as being broken. And Sarah, she understands. She's been where you are. This revelation clearly surprised Emma. She studied Jake's face intently, searching for signs of deception. Your sister? Different circumstances, but yeah, long time ago now. She says helping other women is how she heals herself, bit by bit. Jake stood up slowly, giving Emma plenty of time to move away if she wanted to. I'm not saying you have to decide today, but the offer's there. Room, meals and people who understand. Emma was quiet for a long time, staring at the mountains in the distance. Jake could almost see the war being fought in her mind, the desperate desire for safety and normalcy battling against the terror of vulnerability. What if I can't do it? She asked finally. What if I try to go back to the world and I just fall apart? Then... You fall apart in a safe place with people who care about putting you back together, Jake said. And if it doesn't work out, if you need to come back here for a while, that's okay too. But Emma, you can't live in this barn forever. You deserve more than just surviving. Emma looked at him then with an expression Jake couldn't quite read. It was part gratitude, part terror, part something that might have been hope. Why do you care? She asked. You don't even know me. Jake considered the question seriously. Maybe because I've spent my whole life working with animals that have been hurt and forgotten. Maybe because I know what it's like to feel like the world's given up on you. Or maybe because sometimes we meet people who need help, and helping them helps heal something in ourselves too. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Emma sat in silence, her fingers tracing patterns in the dirt at her feet. When she spoke again, her voice was stronger than Jake had ever heard it. If I said yes, if I wanted to try, what would happen next? Jake felt his heart skip a beat. Sarah would come meet you first. Here, wherever you feel safe, just to talk. No pressure, no commitment. Then, if you felt okay about it, we'd take you to the shelter. You'd have your own room, your own space. You could leave any time. Emma nodded slowly. Okay, she whispered. Okay, let's try. The moment that will change Emma's life forever is coming in our final chapter. Will she find the courage to step back into the world? Subscribe now and ring that notification bell. You won't want to miss how this incredible journey of healing and hope concludes. Sarah Morrison arrived at the Henderson property 3 days later, driving her old pickup truck instead of the official shelter van. She was a woman in her late 30s, with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Unlike Jake, she didn't call out when she arrived. She simply sat on the tailgate of her truck and waited. Emma watched from the barn for nearly an hour before finally emerging. Jake had described his sister, but Emma was still surprised by how normal she looked. Not like a social worker or counselor, just like someone's aunt or neighbor. Sarah smiled when she saw Emma, but didn't stand up or make any sudden movements. You must be Emma, Sarah said when the girl was close enough to hear her speak normally. Jake's told me a lot about you. Says you're pretty good at taking care of yourself. Emma nodded cautiously. He said you understand. Different story, same feelings, Sarah replied. Took me a long time to trust anyone after what happened to me. Still have bad days sometimes. But I've learned that healing isn't something you do alone. They talked for 2 hours that first day. Sarah shared her own story, how she'd been in an abusive relationship that nearly destroyed her, how she'd hidden from the world for months afterward, how terrifying it had been to let people help her. Emma found herself responding to Sarah's honesty with fragments of her own experience. "The thing that scared me most," Sarah said as the afternoon wore on, "was the idea that what happened to me would define me forever, that I'd always be a victim, always be broken." She looked directly at Emma. "But that's not how it works. What happened to you is part of your story, but it's not the whole story. You get to write the rest." When Sarah left that day, she extended an invitation but didn't pressure Emma for an answer. "The shelter has 12 rooms," she said. "One of them is empty, waiting for when you're ready." "Could be tomorrow, could be next month. It'll be there." Emma spent that night lying awake in her makeshift shelter, staring at the stars through gaps in the tarp. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to imagine a different kind of life. A room with real walls, hot showers, conversations with people who didn't know her story unless she chose to share it. The next morning, when Jake arrived with his usual supplies, Emma was waiting for him outside the barn. "I want to try," she said without preamble. "I want to go with your sister." Jake's face broke into the biggest smile Emma had ever seen. "Are you sure?" Emma took a deep breath. "No, I'm terrified, but I'm tired of being scared all the time. I'm tired of just surviving." They packed Emma's few belongings into a small bag, mostly items Jake had brought her over the weeks, plus a few things she'd salvaged from the abandoned house. As they prepared to leave the place that had been her refuge, Emma took one last look around. "Thank you," she said to the barn, to the makeshift shelter, to the months of solitude that had taught her she was stronger than she knew. The drive to Sarah's shelter was quiet. Emma sat in the passenger seat of Jake's truck, watching the landscape change from rural farmland to the outskirts of town. Every mile felt like a step further from safety, but also a step towards something that might be better than just surviving. The Mountain View. Women's Shelter was a converted Victorian house on a quiet residential street. It looked more like a boarding house than an institution, which was exactly what Sarah had intended. Emma's room was on the second floor, small but clean, with a window that looked out over a garden where other women sat reading or talking quietly. "House rules are simple," Sarah explained as she showed Emma around. "Respect each other's space and stories. Contribute what you can, when you can. No judgment, no timeline for healing. Everyone moves at their own pace." That first night, Emma lay in a real bed for the first time in over a year. The sheets were clean and soft, the pillow was the right height, and the walls were solid and warm. But instead of feeling grateful, she felt exposed and vulnerable. She was used to sleeping with one ear, always listening for danger. Around midnight, unable to sleep, Emma crept downstairs to the kitchen. She found another woman there, someone around her own age, with short dark hair and tired eyes. "Can't sleep either?" the woman asked. "I'm Maria. Been here about 2 months." "Emma, just got here today." Maria poured 2 cups of tea from a pot on the stove. "It gets easier," she said, settling into a chair across from Emma. "The sleeping, I mean, and everything else, really." "How do you know?" Maria smiled, and it was the first genuine smile Emma had seen from someone her own age in a very long time. "Because I used to think I'd never sleep through the night again, used to think I'd never trust anyone again." Used to think a lot of things that turned out not to be true. They sat in comfortable silence, drinking tea and watching the moon through the kitchen window. Emma realized this was the first time in months she'd felt something approaching peace. Not happiness, not yet, but the absence of the constant, exhausting vigilance that had been her companion for so long. 6 months later, Emma stood in the garden behind the shelter, helping Maria plant tomatoes for the spring garden. She had gained weight, her hair was clean and styled, and she wore clothes that fit properly. More importantly, she had started sleeping through the night. Jake still visited every week, usually bringing vegetables from his garden or cookies from his wife's kitchen. Emma had met his family now, his wife Lisa and their teenage daughter, people who accepted her presence in their lives without question or judgment. "You look good," Jake said during one of his visits, finding Emma in the shelter's common room, where she was helping another new arrival fill out paperwork. "I feel good," Emma replied, and realized with surprise that it was true. "Most days anyway. Most days is pretty good," Jake said. "Better than no days." Emma had started working part-time at a local bookstore, a job Sarah had helped her find with an employer who asked no questions about gaps in employment history. She was even considering taking a few classes at the community college, though that still felt overwhelming most days. "I've been thinking," Emma said to Jake as they walked through the shelter's garden, "about what you said that first day, about damaged goods." Jake stopped walking and looked at her seriously. "I think maybe we're all damaged goods in some way," Emma continued, "but that doesn't mean we're worthless. Sometimes the things that have been broken and put back together are stronger than things that never got tested." Jake smiled, the same warm smile that had convinced a terrified girl in a barn that maybe, just maybe, the world still had safe places and trustworthy people. "Now you sound like someone who's ready to help other people find their way out of the dark," he said. Emma looked back at the shelter, where she could see Maria in the window, welcoming yet another frightened woman who thought she was. "Beyond saving. Maybe I am," she said. "Maybe that's what my story was always supposed to be about. Not what happened to me, but what I did with it afterward." The sun was setting behind the mountains, the same mountains Emma had stared at from the Henderson property all those months ago. But now, instead of feeling trapped by their immensity, she felt protected by them. They were a reminder that some things endure, that some things are strong enough to weather any storm. Emma's journey from survivor to thriver shows us that healing is possible, even from the darkest places. If this story touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more incredible tales of human resilience and hope. Remember, everyone you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about. Be kind, be patient, and never underestimate the power of showing up for someone who has been forgotten by the world.